Okay, I'm Barbara Flynn Curry, president of IWIL Training Academy. It's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you to our annual Dawn Clark Netsch Policy Forum. Our topic today is From Abortion to Democracy, from A to D, What's at Stake in 2022. Please note that today's event has closed captioning. You can turn it on and off on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom. Each year we sponsor this forum in memory of Dawn, a true trailblazer in Illinois politics. She was a state senator, state comptroller, Democratic candidate for governor, and one of the first women ever invited to teach in a United States law. She worked for women's rights, civil rights, in other words, human rights. And she was a founding mother of IWIL. First, a shout out to her IWIL Training Academy class of 2022, just finished their final program, and to our board members and alumni. I know we're all anxious to know the outcomes of the November 8th elections. Happily, tonight we'll hear from a couple of soothsayers. They've brought their crystal balls and they'll provide us with a sneak peek. A grateful welcome to our two political experts. David Axelrod is the leading political strategist and analyst. We know him from his leadership in the Barack Obama campaigns, his podcast, The Axe Files, his role at UChicago's Institute for Politics, and from rooting for him whenever we see him on CNN. And Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading pollsters, the president of Lake Research, and an ally especially to Democratic women who are running for public office. She has expertise in framing issues that matter to women, and she and her team have also dedicated their time to our organization by helping lead sessions for our classes. Okay, give us your takes, David. We're going to start with you. What's going to happen?
You know, Barbara, Celinda and I spoke before the program began, and we both know what's going to happen, but we feel like it would be unfair to ruin the surprise for everyone. So we're going to be restrained in our forecasts, and I'm going to use a little bit of my time to get out of line here, just to say how much it means to me to be here. One of your founders, the late Barbara Levitt Brown, was one of my dearest friends and one of the most inspiring people I've ever met in politics. And every time I appear here, I think of her. She also sent me Terry Pickerel, who I know is here, who came as a production assistant to my political consulting firm, and now is a partner in her own, Snyder Pickerel, one of the best firms around. And I'm really proud of her. And I know the experience she had at IWIL was a formative experience for her. Barbara, you, as we were talking about before we started, you are someone I covered when you first ran for the legislature in 1978, and I was a reporter at the Tribune, and you and Carol Mosley Braun both got nominated when there were multi-member districts, and you said the last time two women were nominated from one district, a historic event,
political party,
and from the same political party, yes, and you both made history in your own ways, you as a leader in the legislature, Carol as a member of the U.S. Senate. And Celinda herself is a historic figure, because when I started in this business, there weren't a hell of a lot of women around in these key strategic positions. And Celinda was a leading pollster almost from the beginning, and really blazed the trail for other women to play a role in politics, a strategic role in politics, and also blazed the trail for a lot of women to win public office. So all around, and not to mention Dawn Clark Netsch, who's a legend in our state, and was a great friend of mine and a client. Just fantastic to be here. So I think I've used up all my time and I don't have to make any predictions. Which was my goal. I will say this, and I'll throw it over to Celinda, and I'm sure we'll get into an exchange about this. The one thing that this year teaches us all over again is humility. 3 months ago, most forecasters would have told you that this was going to be a banner Republican year for a lot of good reason. A lot of the historical benchmarks that we look to forecast the kind of year it's going to be, we're pointing very much in a Republican direction. And then a series of events occurred, not the least of which was the Dobbs decision, which unleashed a extraordinary reaction, not just among women, but also men. The reemergence of Donald Trump in the center of our politics, just as the January 6th hearings were disclosing so much. And now we have this new chapter with Trump. And then this series of very extreme candidates who he helped nominate, which has changed the calculus relative to the United States Senate and the House, and some of the governor's races in the country, and has really positioned the Republican Party out of the mainstream in a significant way. All this has changed the year. Not to say that those initial sort of benchmarks are meaningless. They are not. People's attitudes toward the economy, although inflation is improving, gas prices are going down. President's approval rating, although that's improving as well. A general sense of the direction of the country, which has been relatively sour. I think a lot of this a holdover from the virus, but what looked to be a Category 5 disaster now is we're trying to assess exactly what this storm looks like and who might end up on the shore here. And so Celinda can answer that question.
Thank you, David.
That was a segue there.
That was a wonderful segue. Thank you. And I want to thank IWIL. We have been involved in a lot of presentations for you all, and really think what you're doing is just remarkable. And I also want to say what a privilege it is to be on here with David. And David is, I think, one of the best analysts out there. So I always rely on what he says. So building on what he says, maybe I'll give you a little bit more detail about how we're seeing the choice issue play out and what are some of the dynamics, because I think there are some patterns here, but these are going to be very close races. And both persuasion and turnout are going to matter a lot. The key for progressives and Democrats is that we must win women by more than we lose men. In close races, we're going to lose men. Even though some men are very energized around the abortion issue, we're going to lose men. And we have to win women by more than that. And the Republicans know that, and they are really trying to target women, and they are targeting them with cultural wedge issues. They're targeting them with crime. They are targeting them with socialism. My favorite piece of data out there is 50% of Americans know what socialism is or think they know what it is. 60% of Americans say they don't like socialism. So a whole bunch of people don't like it, even though they have no idea what it is. Gotta love America. I think that Kansas was a real turning point in our analysis of our strategy. And Kansas is different because it was an initiative. It was the only thing on the ballot. It was a constitutional initiative. And Illinois loves very much Kansas loves very much its constitution. But that said, what we saw was a real jump in registration, and it's happened in a lot of battleground states where younger women in particular are registering, younger Democratic women are registering in record numbers. We're also seeing this as a major motivating factor for surge Democrats who vote in presidential years, but who often don't vote in off years. And for example, 56% of young voters vote in presidential years. On average, only 24% vote in non-presidential years. So this turnout impact is very, very important. And then we are seeing just really dramatic changes in the suburban vote. And Illinois has long been a place where suburban women even as into the Republican Party, have been pro-choice, but certainly a lot of suburban women who now call themselves independents, who were once Republicans, using this issue as a criteria and thinking that the positions that the Republicans and the Trump Republicans have taken is disqualifying. And it's interesting that it affects not just younger voters, but baby boomers too, because for older women, it's not hypothetical when abortion was illegal. We remember when Roe v. Wade did not exist. And there are a lot of women who are very upset by the idea of investigating miscarriages, prohibiting birth control, criminalizing women doctors and nurses. So all of that very, very salient. So it's almost a bimodal distribution, with some younger women very energized and younger men as well, and some older baby boomer women very energized. And I think one prediction I will make is that you may really see record gender gaps, the difference in the vote between men and women, in part because of the abortion issue. Even in safe states like Illinois, and we have been polling on this issue in Illinois quite a bit, voters are giving it a lot of weight. They think the Republicans have gone way too far. And some of the language that is working very, very well is that these Trump Republicans or extreme MAGA Republicans want to take away our freedoms, and our freedom to make personal health care decisions and what's best for our family, ourselves. They also respond very strongly to the language of they would support a mandated ban with no exceptions. There's Latinos in particular, or Latinas, responding very strongly to the language of prohibiting birth control. And, you know, for many, many women, they think, well, prohibiting birth control would be awful, but I don't think that's really going to happen. Interesting, Latinas who follow what happened in Central and South America, where birth control was banned, lots of kinds of birth control were banned, think it's very, very possible that could happen. And then criminalizing women doctors and nurses. And by the way, add nurses, because in every single one of those rooms where there's a doctor, there's a nurse too. And people feel, well, the doctor may have huge insurance, they'll have, they have the money for big lawyers. The poor nurses in there with no support, no legal defense fund, and she's going to be run over and criminalized just as much as the doctor is. This impacts people at all levels, and it impacts people at all levels, offices at all levels. People are applying it to offices like governor because they worry that if their state doesn't take action, it may not be reassured. There's a lot of old laws on the book. Attorney generals, it's a very big issue in attorney general races across the country, including in Illinois. And then people, of course, believe that if the Senate changes hands, that there will be a national ban, and that there will be a record number of lawsuits. So people very, very aware of this. And what we're seeing is no matter what the state of the law is in your state, this can be a very, very powerful issue to voters. And finally, voters are very focused on the slippery slope. People don't think, and women in particular, do not think that this issue and this Trump agenda is going to stop at abortion. They ask, what's next? If you could take away a law that was on the books for 50 years, if you can override this kind of dramatic and go back in this kind of dramatic way, then it's very, very possible that other things will happen. And voters think LGBTQ equality, voter protection, interracial marriage, marriage equality, all of that could be at risk. And of course, the agenda for this Supreme Court is stunning. The laws that are up next are Title IX, affirmative action. I mean, there is no limit. Voters are right. What is next? And this makes this slippery slope argument very, very salient to voters. In fact, the last thing I'll say, and then love to turn it back, David, for us to exchange ideas and include the audiences, is that this is overturning the will of the people. And that unites a lot of elements together. It unites January 6th. It unites what's happened with voting rights laws. It unites what's happening on birth control and abortion and women's basic economic rights. And in fact, we're finding that coupling abortion with things like equal pay and paid leave makes this issue even more powerful, because women in particular think this is not just about abortion. It's a worldview of women. It's a whole ideology, and anything is possible under this ideology. So I saw lots of good comments, even though I couldn't follow it specifically in the chat. Can't wait for those comments to be elevated. And David, I'll hand it back to you.
Celinda, thanks. A wonderful, wonderful summary. And just let me react to a few of the very good points that you made. One is that this is not theoretical any longer, because we've had these trigger laws in many states. We have 12 states, I think, that have something approaching no exceptions laws that are coming online. We've already had some dreadful stories, you know, of women who've been victimized and girls who've been victimized by this law. So this is not a theoretical question any longer. It's not about what might happen. It's about what is happening right now. And the Republicans on this issue are the dogs who caught the car. They were fine as long as Roe was in place. Now Roe isn't in place anymore. Those protections are gone. So the theoretical has become a real and immediate threat. You mentioned the invocation of the word freedom. It was really interesting to me to listen to Pat Ryan, who was the candidate who won up in the 19th district in New York, who won a special election there in a very, very swingy district. And it was thought of as a barometer district as to where some of these races are going to go. He won that race, and he won it. He's a former member of the service, served overseas in combat, and his whole message was wrapped around freedom: the freedom to choose on abortion, the freedom to send your kids to school without fear that they're going to be victimized by a mass shooter, the freedom to vote and to know that your vote will be counted fairly and honestly. And you know, he said, this is what I fought for. This is what I believe America is about. That expropriation of the word, which had been, you know, taken away by Republicans often, was really, really powerful and effective. And I bet effective with swing voters. On the subject of swing voters, Celinda knows this because she does a lot of focus groups as well as polling, and she's been listening to voters for a very long time. 6 months ago, if you listen to a swing voter group, you would hear a lot of lamentations and concern about Democrats and Joe Biden being tugged too far to the left. That all turned around after Dobbs and Trump reemerged and some of the things I said earlier. And now you hear these same independent voters and swing voters saying, I'm really concerned about where this Republican Party is going and where they're going to go. And you see it in the polling numbers. You see significant gains for Democrats among independent voters who appeared to be lost to Democrats before Dobbs and before everything that's happened since. So I think that's going to be very important. Celinda, I think the point you made, my first reaction when the decision came down was that this was going to have a profound impact on governors' races, because governors are often the last line of defense on these issues. And I think, you know, it's not a coincidence that here in Illinois, for example, the first ads that J.B. Pritzker ran when his opponent, Senator Bailey, was chosen were on the issue of abortion, and they've been pounding it ever since. I think in Pennsylvania, this has been the case. In Michigan, when the Republicans nominated their nominee a few weeks ago. The Whitmer campaign was immediately mobilized around this issue. This is an extraordinarily motivational issue, and especially with voters who are most likely to sit out these elections. Younger voters were a real area of concern, and they remain an area of focus. But younger voters get this issue at a very in a very personal way and at a very high level, and this is going to be very motivational for them. Many of these battleground congressional districts are in suburban areas, and many of these states that have battleground Senate races are going to be decided in suburban areas. Mobilizing women in the suburbs to vote has been a real focus and concern. That has changed. It's still a focus and concern, a dramatic difference since the Dobbs decision. And the last thing I'd say, Celinda, is, and you poll this all the time, but there are all kinds of measures of voter interest and enthusiasm. And there was a pretty significant gap in the spring. That gap has pretty much closed because of the events of the last couple of months. I do want to just add one cautionary note, however, and you did as well, and I think it's important. I started off by saying that the one thing that we should learn and we should learn it every time, is the lesson of humility. A lot of these races are very close. Celinda, you may want to address this, but there is a concern about how precisely we can gauge, particularly some of these Trump voters who have sort of eluded capture in polling, and so you've had you've had a kind of false positive in the past by a few points for Democrats. Well, some of these races are going to be decided by a few points, and so vigilance is the order of the day here. Democrats are back in the game, but the game is far from over, and there's still significant advantages for Republicans. And so that's why, I'm reluctant to uncork champagne here, 7 weeks early. I think this is going to be a slog from now to the end, and we'll see. But the Dobbs ruling and Trump's antics and the candidates he's nominated have changed the year in a profound way. I think that we can agree on.
I think, David, everything you said, I would just underscore with exclamation point. So maybe what I'll do is address a couple of the comments that have been made in the chat. First of all, and thank you, Terry, as always, reminding us that, and there are a lot of states where the Supreme Court justices are elected, including Illinois, of course, and this is going to be played out, and pro-choice control of the Supreme Court is up in a number of states. So that is a big concern as well, and what may seem safe is not always safe. The other thing that someone in the chat asked about is, what about them coming back now, which they are coming back very aggressively on so-called late abortions, abortion on demand, abortion as birth control, partial birth abortion, et cetera, live-born abortion. Honest to God, and the ads they run, by the way, which are just disgusting, the ads they run, they don't even show babies, they show kindergartners. Like, we let them go to kindergarten, then we put them back in utero and kill them. I mean, that's the implication. And I don't know if you've seen the ad, Moms Against Abbott, but it is really worth seeing, that takes this on. But one of the things that's very important about abortion later in pregnancy is, for one thing, to emphasize, do not use their language. Do not repeat live born or partial birth or whatever. Secondly, Americans are not very good at math. And so when we ask them how many abortions they think are later in pregnancy, They say half of them, like half early, half late. Well, it's 1 to 2%. And while I'm not for normally using numbers, it really, really helps in this case to say 1 to 2% when something has gone radically wrong. And then people think, whoa, 1 to 2%, man, that must be an extraordinary situation. I can't make that decision for someone else in that situation. So it really reframes the question. And again, those are decisions. Every pregnancy is unique. Every person's life is unique. Those decisions made to be made by the families that are affected, their medical provider, their faith, certainly not some politician. By the way, it really helps as we're going into the campaign to frame up the contrast and to say these politicians want to make these decisions to hold on to their own power. And that is very, very salient to people. One of the things that's very interesting is in 2018, we ran a record number of women and we won office because we did that. And the Republicans were running no women. They couldn't get them out of their primaries. They have now figured out that Anna the Hun can be as right-wing as Attila the Hun. And they now nominate a lot of women. They are running a lot of women right now. And voters don't think that Republican women are necessarily anti-choice because a lot of Republican women they know or independent women weren't that anti-choice. And so it's really important to draw the contrast here, particularly if you see a contrast or a candidacy that involves a Republican woman, because voters do not necessarily assume that these Republican women have taken as extreme of positions as the Republican men have. So I think that was a lot of the questions that were in the chat, and maybe we open it up to people's.
Yeah. Let me just respond to one thing you said, because it's also, it's traditional in American politics to cater to a base and then try and move over in a general election. And we see this, for example, in the Arizona Senate race right now. Blake Masters, who had, a personhood amendment on his website, along with a lot of other provocative language about abortion in the primary, has now he's aborted that language from his website, and he did an ad sort of trying to walk back his position on abortion. It's important that candidates be held responsible. Almost every one of these candidates has signed some questionnaire somewhere in which they took very extreme positions, and they need to be held to those positions. Candidates who are running against those candidates and groups that are supporting candidates who are running against those candidates need to hold those candidates accountable. The truth of the matter is that the Republican Party is very much in the thrall of these very extreme forces. And in order to survive a primary, a lot of candidates submit. So be vigilant about keeping your eyes open for that. I'm sorry, Celinda, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't. It was perfect. Thank you. So I don't know, Barbara, if we want to turn it open or we can talk some more about these issues. If there are some other questions I noticed in the chat, the birth control being a very serious issue, and that lots of people need it for other health reasons. One thing Karen raised that I want to address is we need to take language back, remind people we are all pro-life. We are also pro-choice while they are anti-choice. The one thing I would say, one message that we tested that didn't work very well, and I'm sure it enrages everybody on this call. It absolutely infuriates me that they will talk pro-life, 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 and then it will do nothing to support these families and children after the child is born. And it really infuriates me. And it's the height of hypocrisy. Unfortunately, American voters have a very high tolerance for hypocrisy. And that message, frankly, does not test well at all. So as much as it makes us really angry, the other thing is we don't want to use the language of choice anymore because choice sounds frivolous. You want to use the language of decision, take away freedoms. These are heftier concepts in people's mind than choice. Choice is, what am I going to have for dinner? What color is my swimsuit going to be? Your freedoms, your personal healthcare decisions, your decisions about your body, your decisions about your family, these are hefty things to people. And so the whole pro-life, pro-choice paradigm, we don't want to use. It's not as useful for us as some of the other things that we've always meant by that.
Hey, Celinda, let me ask you a question. And I'm the least qualified person probably on this Zoom to discuss some of these issues, certainly from a personal standpoint. But just from a strategic standpoint, it struck me that there was all this talk about the sort of controlling one's own body and being able to, and I plainly understand that. I have 3 kids. I know what my wife, what it meant to carry those children. My wife's, my middle boy broke my wife's tailbone coming out. She's still uncomfortable. But I mean, it's a real, there's so much involved with just having a child, but it's also a commitment, of a life, your life to that child for most people who have children. And so it's not just about, it strikes me as a guy who probably shouldn't be opining on this, that's not just about controlling your body, it's also about controlling your life and making, government shouldn't be making these life decisions for you, for your family. And I'm just wondering about language. I guess I'm asking your wise counsel on that.
So some of that language tests very well. I think right now we're kind of in an immediate fight around Roe v. Wade and access to abortion. And by the way, you can use the word abortion. It tests very well. We don't have to use euphemisms. We don't have to be worried about it. But you're right. And particularly in more Catholic areas and in more conservative states like North Dakota and South Dakota, the language of you can't make this decision for someone else unless you've walked in their shoes, that every family should have the ability to decide when, whether, and how many children to have. Though, because people do think these are weighty decisions. And for the long-term debate, we definitely want to use some of that language and the economic implications. It also tests very well to say every life is unique, every pregnancy is unique. Because women who've had more than one child, and your wife would say this, each pregnancy was very unique in terms of her experience of it. But for the immediate cause right now, being only 56 days out, I think it's better to just form this around, because they've gone too far, that they are mandating a ban, no exceptions. Politics trying to make these decisions. And for the long-term debate, I think some of the language you're bringing in is very good, actually.
I think the, one of the early examples was this young child in Indiana or in Ohio who had to travel to Indiana, 10 years old or whatever. And I think that one example, which at first, some on the other side of this debate denied, before it was clear that this was what happened, just really shone a light on the brutality of this decision. And then, of course, the decision of the Attorney General there to go after the doctor in Indiana, who's extraordinarily eloquent, by the way, and victimize her for taking care of this child. It was another layer of that. I think, Celinda, my first reaction when the decision was leaked and ultimately when it was made was that this was Mitch McConnell and McCarthy's worst nightmare. And I think they were sort of counting on Roberts to somehow moderate that decision, perhaps some version of Mississippi, which would not be the whole thing at once. But now this has gotten away from them. And, I think that they're hoping that the issue will die out before November. It sure doesn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we tested, they would have been a lot stronger if they had been on weeks. I mean, first of all, people are not very good at math. People have no idea how many weeks are in a pregnancy. People get completely confused. Or science, the language that Roberts wanted them to use, that the science has changed, that we're constantly advancing, that we have to modernize our laws to keep up with the science. That's very appealing to Americans. They think, yeah, all of us have seen those little pictures, and yeah, the science does change, and Americans love modernizing anything. So they were on much stronger terrain, but this did get away from them. And you have candidates like the candidate running against the Attorney General of Michigan saying no health exception. There's no health diagnosis that shows you ever need an abortion. It's like, well, when did you get your medical degree? And thank you for trying to be my doctor when I already got a doctor I like, who actually knows what he or she is talking about. The other thing that's really interesting, I'm not a huge fan of stories because people are always trying to fix the people, but this is an area where stories have made a huge difference. Everybody in America knows that story of that 10-year-old. Lots of people in America, particularly women, know the story of the woman who had a septic pregnancy, went into a emergency room. The doctor said, I want to treat you, but I can't treat you till I call the lawyer for the hospital to find out what I can do. Everybody knows the woman who was investigated for the miscarriage that bled for 10 days. I mean, these are things that are horrific to people. It's like, it's bad enough to go through it. I do not need the politician in there making my life worse. So these stories really, really do matter.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just have a question, and that is that it looks as if Donald Trump is doing well in the Republican primaries. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but it looks like a lot of his MAGA people are winning. And my question has to do with Democratic primaries. Are we seeing the same kind of effect in Democratic primaries? Are particularly progressive candidates likely to prevail over the more moderate ones, or is it more of a mixed bag?
Well, I think the answer is that it is in terms of races that have pitted progressives with more moderate or center left candidates, I think it's a much more mixed bag. The thing that's and I don't want to stress, because it makes me uneasy when people try and call these things analogous, because Democrats have agreement over a broad range of goals and disagreements over maybe prioritization, maybe execution. But the people who Trump is nominating are nominated really on the basis of one issue, which is, are you willing to disavow the last election? And with that comes people like Doug Mastriano and Carrie Lake, the governor's candidate in Arizona, who bring other things with them. So the extreme. There are differences there are gradation in the Democratic Party. There is a full-out extremist movement within the Republican Party that Donald Trump is leading, and that really has that party in its thrall right now. And so fundamentally different. But the answer to your question is moderates have fared relatively well in these primaries. There have been some significant wins for progressives, and there have been some significant wins for the candidate that was deemed the more moderate candidate. But Celinda, you're out there working for these candidates. So love to hear your analysis.
Yeah, I think you summarized it right. I think that Democratic primary has been a mixed bag. And there's been some very unfortunate reapportionment fights where I feel really bad because we've had really good candidates pitted against each other. On the Republican side, I would say two things. There definitely is a Trump base in the Republican Party and Republican primary voters. That said, however, noticeably what happens is they're winning when there are multiple candidates. And then what you've noticed is like the woman who won in Alabama in the Sessions seat, she's not a Trumper. She was not the Trump endorsed candidate,
Right.
but they didn't say anything bad about Trump. So she never said anything either way. She just said, oh, I really admire Donald Trump's policy on this, that, and the other thing. So what I think is more interesting is that it's a little bit more nuanced in their primaries, and that what the candidates do is they tend not to be anti-Trump. And when they are, then they pay a very high price, like Liz Cheney did, who I think is really courageous. And I really agree. She would have won that district by 73% if she had not been so courageous. That said, it's really important not to characterize all Republicans this way as we go into the general. And you can say extreme MAGA, you can say Trump Republicans, you can say a faction of the Republican Party, but the president is really right on this, that it's important for us not to make it seem like we think all Republicans are like this, because voters don't. They think, yeah, it's a faction, it's a and a lot of other Republicans are scared to death of this faction, but it's not all Republicans.
Yeah, no, look, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And in fact, I thought that was, I had a little discomfort with the interpretation of the president's democracy speech, because the truth of the matter is that he has accomplished a lot. And some of the things he's accomplished has been because there were Republicans who were courageous enough to work with him, despite the fact that Donald Trump and his faction were dead set against any cooperation. And so, I think it's valuable and important for Democrats to drive a wedge between the Trump faction and other Republicans who are discomfited by Trump. And I think that's going to be important in a general election. If you shave off a few points, right now in Pennsylvania, both the Senate and governor's candidates are getting 11% of the voters who voted for Trump. So it's important to keep your point in mind, Celinda. That said, if Democrats win the United States Senate, it's going to be because Donald Trump saddled the Republican Party with a group of candidates who are too extreme to win a general election in a swing state. So, Pennsylvania is an example of that. Arizona is going to be an example of that. We'll see what happens tomorrow in New Hampshire, but that could be another example of that. I think that if Democrats retain control of the United States Senate, there will be two co-MVPs, Samuel Alito and Donald Trump. Now, here's a question that, let me roll up here. It's not an abortion-related question. From Eric Herman, there was some talk a few weeks ago about democracy or similar wording being the top issue in the national poll. Is that moving voters at all? Will candidates talk about that instead of other more traditional campaign issues down the stretch? Celinda, I know you advised the White House, and I'm sure you looked closely at this. I think it's important to understand that I think that there's real concern about democracy, but it may mean different things to different people. And, there are a bunch of Republicans who buy into the election canard about 2020, and the idea that there's massive voter fraud, and they believe that is and that's of course been used as a pretense to pass laws that are intended on discouraging people from voting. And then there are people, I'm sure many people on this Zoom, who have deep concern about the erosion of pillars of democracy, and including the free and fair elections and the willingness of incumbents to cede their offices, and willingness to foment insurrection. So I'd be a little leery of these polls that say threats to democracy are the number one issue that people are voting on. And, apropos to this whole discussion, there are very specific issues that should be front and center for people. And the abortion issue certainly will be one of them, or should be one of them. Celinda, I over talked there, but
No, not at all. I
Never.
think it's stated, I think you raised a really good point, that under that democracy are a bunch of Democrats who have one definition, a bunch of Republicans who say the election was stolen. And even when we say free and fair elections, there's some Republicans who go along with that and say, yeah, no fraud, no undocumented people or illegal immigrants, quote unquote, voting. So there's a both sidism to some of this stuff. Democracy also doesn't test that well with younger people. Talking about the will of the people, talking about our freedoms, that tests better. And I think also there is, in terms of mobilizing Democrats, the surge Democrats, people voting on years but not off years, there is a linkage about rule of law. And January 6th had a lot more penetration than people ever thought it would. And now the Mar-a-Lago FBI, files and endangering people and nuclear threats, that's pretty salient to people. And so people, we had an independent guy in a focus group last week say, it's really ironic to me that the biggest crook in America is using law and order, law and order, law and order. And he had been a Trump voter. He had said, I voted for Trump on economic issues primarily. So I think it's complicated. I do think that stopping Trump is something that can be motivating for surge voters. And we have been testing the language. If you want to stop Trump in 2024, you better vote in 2022. And that does catch people's attention. It's like, ooh, yeah, okay, I guess I can't wait. I think it's also helped a lot that the president has more visibly been getting things done. I mean, honestly, this president's been a very good president. He's gotten a lot done, but people don't know what he's done. And it's all been in euphemistic big packages that people don't know what's in it. And so for us all to be talking very specifically, and one of the things I think we're not talking nearly enough about is the prescription drug issue and the pricing. This is a hot issue with voters. It's really hot. It's our best answer to inflation. It's the area where we have the most credibility. They voted against caps on insulin. This infuriates the whole northern tier of the United States because, I come from Montana. We can drive 20 miles across the border and get insulin for 1/10 the price. This is ridiculous. And these prices go up and down, and you wouldn't even cap it for insulin. South Dakota, the number one cause of death in South Dakota is diabetes.
mhm.
Their senator voted against capping insulin prices. That's ridiculous. So I think there are some things here that we can bring in the mix, but in general, I would say the democracy issue it's more complicated than it looks on the surface. Two, we can motivate some surge Democrats with this whole notion, if you want to beat Trump in 2024, you better get at it in 2022. And then let's not forget bringing forward the places that we've had some successes, because that's very important to voters.
And it's telling on the Trump point that the Republican Party, the whole Republican Party seems united in their desire to keep him from announcing for president before November. And it does raise the question, if he's a liability in the general election now, why wouldn't he be a liability in two years from now. But on your point on prescription drugs and insulin, you know, history suggests that the disproportionate number of voters who are going to vote in a midterm election are older voters, and this is certainly a motivational issue for those voters. So they're important to be stressed. I just think the tangible that touches people's lives is more impactful than theoretical issues that may seem a little more abstract, particularly when, you know, inflation is a reality in people's lives, that people are feeling that they're struggling. If you're doing stuff to help, you better let them know. And if the other side is opposing that, you got to let them know as well.
There are a few other questions in the chat about the abortion issue. How does religion play a role? If somebody really thinks that abortion is murder, how do you deal with that? And I think I saw a question or two about gun control. Is there any reason to gun have any legs in this 2022 election?
So number one, in terms of gun control, I should have mentioned that actually as one of the issues that people think is a slippery slope. Gun control just differs a lot by geography. You do not want to be running on gun control in Alaska, Montana, at least not 58 days out. But it can be a really strong issue in Illinois. It's a very strong issue there. So it depends on the geography. Even though it's a very frustrating issue because we have complete agreement on things like background checks and increasing the age of getting a semi-automatic or automatic weapon. I will just say, as a point of personal privilege, and I grew up on a ranch in Montana. I was a competitive marksman as a young person. I just think that our biggest problem with guns issue right now is we have these horrific events, everybody gets, and then they won't move on it. And I think that until we can get gun owners to talk to gun owners, we're never going to move people on this issue the way we should. And if you're a gun owner, if you've ever shot a gun, you know that if you're in Illinois and you're shooting a deer with a semi-automatic weapon, you're going to have to go to Michigan to pick up that deer meat. This is absurd. These weapons are extremely dangerous. Military veterans don't use these weapons in domestic settings. So we got to have gun owners talk to gun owners. And I don't think we're going to see as much as we would like to see in the next 58 days or 56 days. In terms of abortion, 60% of Americans do think abortion is murder. Doesn't mean they want to make that decision for someone else. And certainly doesn't mean they want their local politician to make that decision for someone else. And certainly doesn't mean that someone wants to mandate, that they want to mandate and ban by someone who has absolutely no idea about what your life is like or what your situation is. So I wouldn't fall into that trap of, yeah, we don't have to address that people think it's murder. That's the point. The decision is not yours, politician. The decision is a woman, her family, her doctor, a person. You know, we really cannot be making these decisions for other people, and politicians shouldn't be making these decisions for anybody.
Yeah, let me just one postscript to the gun discussion. I think where it can make a difference is in some of these suburban districts. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the killings, the murder, the massacre in Uvalde, the massacre in Highland Park here in Illinois, coming amidst all this other, did help create a kind of sense of extremism. And I think the fact that McConnell signed on to the gun bill was a strategic decision on his part, that there was danger in being completely unresponsive to these events. So I agree with you in terms of moving the issue, Celinda, that a lot more work has to be done. In terms of how it might affect this election, I do think it's part of the mix in these suburban districts.
I totally agree. It's very strong in the suburban districts. So I totally agree with that. I think the other thing is, we have been on the defense on abortion for so long that we think we have to address all these issues. The table is turned upside down. Uh, we should keep it simple. They have made it quite simple by their absolute and their extremism. They have made this quite simple. And now, we don't have it actually. And one of your participants said we can't use the freedom argument against the murder argument. Yes, we can actually. This is not your decision to make for someone else. This is our freedom, our say, our lives. So I think that I would say that a lot of the things we were struggling with so much, and that nuances and the ambiguity, they made it unambiguous. They could have made it a lot more ambiguous by saying 6 weeks, and people have no idea, 6 weeks, 15 weeks. A whole bunch of guys in a focus group asked how many weeks are there in a trimester. People had no idea. But now they've made it simple, and we should keep our messaging simple. They are for bans with no exceptions. They are for mandated bans. They are for arresting people, women, doctors, and nurses. It's clear now. They've gone too far.
Yeah, and to underscore the efficacy of that argument, just look at the races around the country that are competitive races and ask yourself how many Republican candidates are wanting to fight it out on the issue of abortion. And I think the answer will be few to none. So I think that tells you about where the strength of the argument lies. And they do not want this to be an election about abortion. They want it to be about inflation. They want it to be about Biden. But they don't want it to be about these kind of extreme issues, and abortion in particular. And I agree, Celinda. I think supporters of abortion rights need to reorient their thinking about this and take the offensive because it's a winning argument.
Sounds right. Any further thoughts before we wrap up?
This has been a pleasure. Thank you. And David, it's been so fun doing it with you.
Somebody did ask how
crime
somebody did ask how crime is polling in this particular election. Is this going to be a very big deal?
Celinda,
David?
It's a pretty big deal. It depends on the race. It's a big deal in AP races, for example. We get characterized as defunding the police, and that is not a popular idea.
Right.
Reforming the police and adding other people to police is a popular idea. It's an urban issue. It's really affecting suburban voters.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, just as guns can have an impact in the suburban areas, the crime issue doesn't. All of us in Illinois and in the Chicago area understand this. So, I mean, that's another area of emphasis that the Republican candidates are going to want. They want the election to be about that. And, an understanding of where people's minds are on that issue, and the language that you use, as Celinda suggests, is really important there, because that is a potential trap for candidates.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Otherwise, we'll say thank you, David. Thank you, Celinda, for sharing your time and your expertise. But if you have one more thing you want to jump right up and say it, go for it.
Well, we talked about democracy. Democracy needs all of you. I mean, the one thing that we've learned over the last, I started the Institute of Politics 10 years ago, and I never imagined that we'd be where we are. But what we've learned is that this was started as an experiment. It required responsibility on the part of every citizen to pay attention, to be involved. It required people to lean in and not out. And so, I'm pleased that you have this training. We need all of you. And I hope to see you all in the corridors of power, in the back rooms where strategies are developed. We need your wisdom. We need your talent.
And I would
Thank you
just,
very much. Go ahead.
it's up
Celinda.
to, as one of my prized possessions, my grandmother, who was German and couldn't even read English very well, her most prized possession were Eleanor Roosevelt's book, It's Up to the Women, which has passed on to me, which I am very, I feel very precious about. And it's up to the women. We got to turn out, we've got to vote, and we've got to run for office. And IWIL does all of that. So thank you for all you do. And let's keep rocking for the next 56 days.
Okay, thank you both very, very much. And thanks to all of us for listening and learning. Here at the Training Academy, we'll soon be selecting our delegate class of 2023, open on September 26th. Remember that we offer our program at no major cost to the class members. And this happens only because of your very strong. And while Zoom is great, we hope to see you in person. Join us October 13th and our first in-person fundraising party in 3 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and we are honoring our founding mother and our founding father. That would be Loretta and Dick Durbin. We're a small organization, but our reach is huge. Please consider contributing and joining us in Chicago. To make it easy, you'll find a link in the chat. Your help allows us to continue training deaf women across the state to run for public office. And when Democratic men run, Democratic women win. Thank you all. See you on the campaign trail. Good night.